Cheating. It sucks. And no, I'm not talking about the Tiger Woods JFK type. I'm talking about getting an unfair advantage against your opponent that either isn't against the rules but should be, or just straight up isn't allowed. Most of the time when it comes to high-level sports, cheating is caught and punished accordingly. But what happens when they actually do get away with it? We're gonna be avoiding the obvious ones like guys using performance-enhancing drugs or the Astros having cameras on trash cans to steal signs.
I meant to say cameras and trash cans. My bad.
No, we're going to be going with much simpler, bare-bones rule violations here that, at least through the rest of the games, these athletes pretty much got away with it scot-free. Starting off with something light that ultimately didn't really affect the game, but is still technically against the rules. In this game between the Brewers and the Yankees, this ball is hit high into the outfield. Center fielder Trent Grisham is going for it, and for some reason, instead of using his glove to grab the ball or just barehanding it because it wasn't moving that fast, he took off his hat and used that to stop the ball. Now, as you can see, this didn't affect the game, as he was still there and he still would have gotten the ball either way, but this is technically a penalty and it wasn't called. If it was called, that definitely would have affected the game because that would have advanced the runners 3 bases. The final score wound up being 4-2 Yankees, and this happened in the top of the 9th inning. So who knows what could have happened if Trent Grisham was punished for using his hat as an in-game tool and they got those 3 extra bases on that play. Maybe the umpires didn't know about this rule, they didn't see it happen, or they just figured the same thing, that he was right there so he would have gotten it anyways and therefore they didn't need to call it, which would be a horrible excuse because that shouldn't matter when it comes to calling a penalty. But either way, 3 bases is a huge penalty call to miss. Most likely this rule was made so you can't throw your hat or glove up to keep a ball that was going to be a homer in the field, so I get why it's a thing. Obviously that wasn't the situation here, but at the same time, when it comes to the rules, that's the rules. If that was the umpire's rationale, then in my opinion, you shouldn't be able to pick and choose what you do and don't enforce. I don't know though, what do you guys think? Let me know down in the comments. And yes, this is engagement bait. Comments help us with the algorithm. In contrast to the last one, this situation undeniably affected the game. Like, a lot. This is an April 2021 game between the Miami Marlins and the New York Mets. And the Mets are actually the ones who cheated, so to Mike, my Mets fan boss, I know you're watching this. Ha ha, ha ha ha, ha ha ha. Bottom of the 9th inning, game is tied and the bases are loaded for the Mets. Michael Conforto is up to bat with 1 ball and 2 strikes, and this pitch comes in for strike 3. Mets win. Confused yet? Well, that's because yes, the ball was a strike and he didn't swing at it, but the pitch hit him. So the Mets win. This is where it gets frustrating though, because to be considered hit by pitch, the batter has to make an effort to get out of the way of the ball, not swing at it, and the pitch has to be outside of the strike zone. Not only did he not make an effort to get out of the way of this ball, in fact, he put his elbow out further to get hit by it, but the ball was also in the strike zone. But nope, according to baseball's rulebook, this play is not reviewable, so Michael Conforto gets away with sticking his elbow out into the strike zone to get hit by the pitch and wins them the game. Even the Mets broadcasters are outraged by the level of luck the Mets just got. And guess what? The call stood. This is an umpire we're talking about here. They're never wrong. There are perfect little golden boys in every way possible. Honestly, I think the craziest part of this entire situation is the fact that it wasn't even Angel Hernandez who was behind the plate during this call. Now that we got some of the baseball ones out of the way, let's throw a football cheater in real quick, shall we? Oakland Raiders versus San Diego Chargers, 1978. With less than 20 seconds left on the clock, the Raiders are down 14-20 at the 14-yard line. Quarterback Ken Stabler has the ball and is about to be sacked, ending the game with the Chargers taking home the win when he fumbles it. Forward. Nicknamed the Holy Roller, this wasn't an ordinary fumble, as the ball was tossed forward, picked up by another Raiders player, tossed forward again, and then finally recovered in the end zone, winning the game for the Raiders 21-20. I probably don't need to explain this, but just in case I do, the answer is no, you're not allowed to do this. But from the angle the referee Jerry Markbright had on the play, it just looked like a normal fumble to him. I guess. If you intentionally fumble the ball forward, it's supposed to be considered a forward pass, which would mean the pass would be incomplete and the play would be dead. But the ref's call stood that it was just a double fumble that somehow both went forward, and that was that. This call was surrounded in controversy for years, with some people agreeing that, yeah, it was just a fumble, and some people being correct in saying that it was intentionally fumbled forward. And of course, Stabler himself publicly stated over and over again that it was just a simple fumble, at least until 2008, where he did an interview in which he was asked to convince the camera crew that he didn't flip the ball forward. And this is what he had to say.
You convinced us that he didn't flip that ball underhand?
No, I can't convince you of that, because I did.
And of course, we gotta throw some basketball ones in there too, because they're not safe from cheaters getting away with it either. Like this, for example, where this Portland Trail Blazers player did whatever this is. I mean, hey, yoga is probably a good way to keep you lumber and spry for playing basketball, but I don't think you're allowed to hit a half-standing forward bend over a guy in the middle of a game. But I mean, the officials didn't say anything about it, so I guess you can. And believe it or not, this isn't the only time that the Blazers did something against the rules that didn't get called. In this 2008 game against the Celtics, they ended up scoring with 6 guys on the court, which, if you don't know, you're only allowed to have 5 guys restaurant on the court at once. And fun fact, 6 is more than 5. Having 6 guys play against 5 is probably the simplest and most obviously unfair thing you could possibly do in basketball. But yet again, the refs didn't catch it in time, and there's a rule that makes it so you can't take the score away, so the point stands. They ended up winning that game by 5 too. Heading back to baseball land, in this game against the Mets, karma for Michael Conforto maybe, Cubs player Pete Crow Armstrong smacks this ball deep into right field, going straight through first and heading to second. Pete is pretty fast, so he beats out the throw to second pretty easily. But as he's coming in, he overshoots his slide a bit and goes past the base. So with his quick thinking, he pulls off his helmet and uses it to hold himself safe on second. Now, here's the funny thing about that. That's not allowed. You can't use your helmet as an extension of your arm. He should have been called out because he's not technically on the base. His helmet is. Like, I think it's pretty obvious that you can't do that, but for some reason the umpires still called him safe. I don't know how this call stood. In what world are you allowed to use your helmet to extend your reach to the bag and be like, yeah, no, he's safe? To be fair, I guess, at least at the time, there wasn't a specific rule saying that this wasn't allowed, but apparently MLB was asked about this and they said that he should have been called out, and if the play was reviewed, he would have been called out. So this is kind of one of those situations I mentioned earlier in the intro where it's not technically against the rules, but like it definitely should be. Like, could you imagine if you could bring the bat with you and use it to beat out throws? All right, let's venture out of North America for a little bit and talk about some soccer. Specifically, something that happened in the 1986 World Cup quarterfinals between Argentina and England. This one here is probably the most famous act of successful petty cheating in the entire history of sports. Nicknamed the Hand of God, this play is insane. Argentina legend Diego Maradona swoops in out of nowhere after this ball is kicked up into the air. Now, what a lot of players might do here is try to headbutt the ball towards the goal, as that is a totally legal thing to do in soccer. The ball in this situation is a little too high to effectively do that, so he does something that goes against pretty much the most important rule of the sport. Don't touch the ball with your hands. Unless you're the goalie. You know, it's hard to say for sure, but I think he might have touched the ball with his hands here, but the jury's still out, so who knows? Yeah, I mean, as you can clearly see, he straight up just grabbed the ball and threw it into the goal, and none of the refs called it, so it counted as a score. Argentina went on to win that game 2-1. This next one's a sport I don't think I've ever talked about, so let's get into a cheater in the long-distance running category. In 1979, Rosie Ruiz came in 11th place in the New York City Marathon and ended up getting a qualifying time for the Boston Marathon in the process. This was strange because, as some of the other runners found out later, not only was she not in runner shape, but upon being questioned, she barely even knew anything about marathoning in general. So how did this lady come out of nowhere with barely any experience and almost finish in the top 10 in a massive yearly marathon? I mean, it's pretty obvious she cheated, and that's also what pretty much everyone agreed on in 1979. It was found out that she got this incredible time by getting on the subway to cut down her time and energy usage. Taking the subway during a marathon. It's so simple. Why didn't every other runner think of this? And you know what they say, once a cheater, always a cheater. So when she ran the 1980 Boston Marathon, she miraculously came in first place in the women's division. Unfortunately for her though, there was no subway system she could utilize during this race, so she had to get creative, as in she literally just snuck into the race during the last mile. A lot of the other runners were skeptical about this, given the fact that she looked pretty unfazed by the over 26 miles she supposedly just ran and the things I mentioned earlier. And about 8 days later, the truth was revealed. She got away with it during the races, but her accomplishments were stripped from her as soon as the powers that be actually put all the pieces together. Also, a quick side note, this lady just seemed to be an all-around con artist and criminal apparently, as she later would be thrown in jail for stealing money from the Manhattan real estate company and getting caught dealing cocaine at a Miami airport hotel. Honestly, if you had just told me this lady was a coke dealer and that she won the Boston Marathon, I probably would have believed you.
Cocaine is a hell of a drug.
And in just a few years after this whole situation, an MLB player named Mike Scott was making waves in the baseball scene. But as per usual in this video, something wasn't quite right with this guy. The first sign something was off was in May of 1985 when Chicago Cubs first baseman Leon Durham found a small round piece of sandpaper near the mound. Interestingly, it was small enough that it could have been easily concealed inside of a glove. And just a year later, when Reds pitcher Tom Browning took the mound after Scott, he noticed that the ball had, quote, a big old scuff mark on it as clear as a quarter on a piece of paper. With all this evidence stacking up, paired with the fact that his two-seam fastball had suddenly developed horizontal movement by 1995, within a few years, pretty much the whole league had come to the conclusion that, yeah, this guy isn't legit. They were never able to gather enough proof to actually get it written in stone that he was cheating though, and in 1986, he won the NL Cy Young Award, officially making him one of the very best pitchers in all of baseball. Most people would probably never know that this guy had a litany of cheating evidence against him. People in the league were obviously frustrated and there was really nothing being done about it. Pitcher and previous NL Cy Young winner Dwight Gooden even said, actually, we knew that Scott was scuffing the ball, but the umpires were letting him get away with it, and that made him impossible to hit. Later on, like a proper politician, Scott did kind of admit to scuffing the ball while also leaving it ambiguous enough that maybe a few clinically insane people out there would still believe he didn't cheat. He said, quote, "They can believe whatever they want to believe. Every ball that hits the ground has something on it. I've thrown balls that were scuffed, but I haven't scuffed every ball I've thrown. Hey, you know what? That's all I need. I'm on his side now, like, come on." I mean, we've all seen it happen before. Ball gets hit into the dirt, it poops out a piece of easily concealable sandpaper. Like, guys, this is basic baseball knowledge. Come on. But no, seriously, he was definitely cheating. This next one's just kind of silly, and at the time when it was being done, it wasn't technically against the rules, but basically there was a trend where guys would wear tearaway jerseys. Greg Pruitt was the man who really popularized them in the NFL in the 1970s. They were basically just exactly what they sound like, a very rickety, thin jersey made out of easily tearable material so that when the defender would go to grab onto you by the jersey, it would basically just fall apart in their hands, meaning that the only way to actually bring you down was to get a full-on body-to-body tackle. And in 1979, these jerseys were finally banned by creating what's pretty much known as the Greg Pruitt rule. I'd never thought I'd talk about a Little League World Series in a video, but here we are. In 2001, a kid named Danny Almonte was an absolute beast on the mound. He struck out 62 of the 71 hitters he faced, 0 earned runs, with just 3 hits in 3 games, and one of them was even a perfect game. This obviously made everyone a little suspicious. And after some digging, a few weeks after the tournament was over, they found out that this kid was 14 years old. The kids he was facing were around 10 to 12. Like, yeah, no wonder he dominated everyone and pitched a perfect game. That's like a high schooler versus an MLB player in little kid years, so yeah, I guess you could say he had a bit of an unfair advantage over him. Not only was he 2 years over the limit to play with a falsified birth certificate and everything, but even if he was the correct age, he wasn't even properly enrolled in the New York school he was representing. And the worst part about all this is that supposedly the kid didn't even know about the real extent of the situation, and it was all the adults who were watching over him that really came up with this whole scheme. That's messed up. And finally, I want to end this video with a cheating scandal from the Olympics. Back in 67 CE, yes, you heard that right, I'm not having a stroke, the Emperor of Rome, Nero, yeah, the guy who was assassinated, I promise you're not hearing this wrong. He decided that he wanted to participate in the Olympics. And boy oh boy did Emperor Nero get into some shenanigans during this whole ordeal. For context, the Olympics were created to honor the Greek god Zeus, and therefore the entire event was deeply religious and very strict on tradition. So naturally, he started by changing the date in which it was held to accommodate when he would be visiting Greece. He also realized very quickly that he's just kind of a fat dude who just drinks and sits around all day, so doing anything actually athletic was out of the question. But luckily for him, it just so happened that a few new sports had been added to the Olympics this year, which include poetry, singing and acting, and playing the lyre. How lucky this is for him. Also, don't mind the giant bag of gold coins sitting in the corner by all the officials running the Olympics. Even luckier is the fact that he just so happened to be extremely good at every event he participated in and won every single one of them. Don't mind the second, even larger bag of gold coins sitting in the same corner. There was, however, one athletic event that he did want to take part in, and that was the quadriga race. Or quadriga, I don't know, just pretend I said whichever one's correct. In this event, you race chariots that are, as you could probably glean from the title, pulled by 4 horses. And good old Nero pulled up 10 horses deep. Since in a lot of these events, the athletes had to compete naked, he probably got the impression that people didn't think his ding-dong was quite big enough, so he had to compensate in some other ways. In the middle of the race, he lost control and was flung out of his chariot, injuring him and taking him out of the race completely. But somehow, the underdog, Emperor Nero, still pulled out a win for the boys back home in ancient Rome. Taken from us too soon. What an absolute once-in-a-lifetime athlete that Nero was. May he rest in peace. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. As always, if you liked it, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that good stuff. If you made it all the way to the end, type "Fly High Nero" down in the comments. Or just anything. Again, it helps with the algorithm. Anyways, have a lovely day, gamers. Peace.